So, hello everyone. My name is Frank Förster from the University of Hertfordshire, and I'm presenting today Robots Learning to Say No, our journal paper in the ACM Transactions of Human-Robot Interaction. You see the full title here on the bottom. The aim of the study or paper is to determine the developmental origin of negation. That means we want to see where the first negation words come from originally, how children or robots learn them. The focus is on words rather than grammar, because words precede grammar, at least in terms of the active vocabulary, in terms of active productions. And in English, the very first word, one word amongst the first 10 words of children is no, and it's basically the main negation word, so to speak. We are following a constructive approach. That means our study serves the dual purpose of, first of all, understanding how we as humans learn to use negation words appropriately, and at the same time, by understanding how we do that, enabling robots to engage in this kind of aspect of human speech. So another contribution of this work is to symbol grounding. So we are one of the first, I think, developed one of the first approaches to ground abstract symbols that are not linked to an external entity or a label of an external object or category of such objects, but of a kind of something that doesn't have such external reference. So in terms of the background, theories of word learning currently in developmental psychology focus mostly on what I call referential words. That means objects, object labels, or labels of categories of such objects. And a very central notion, for example, I think mostly pushed by Michael Tomasello, is the notion of joint attentional frames within which word learning is supposed to occur. So we have a child, we have an adult speaker, and we have an external referent. So we have something that the two are focusing their attention on, and it is within such frames, within such setups, that word learning is supposed to occur. So not, say, by putting the children in front of a TV set and just having them passively exposed to language, but it takes this kind of active engagement, mutual gaze, and so on for word learning to happen. Now the problem is this can conceivably work for these kind of what I call referential words, but it doesn't work for other word categories, negation words being one of these. If we look at the literature on developmental literature on the root of negation, we find that there is most work is descriptive in nature. That means we have work, I mean there's not that much work, but the work that there is mostly on how children kind of, what negation words they say when, so kind of the developmental trajectory in terms of their production. But there is not much in terms of theorizing how they learn these words. What exactly is the kind of interpersonal mechanism between them and the caretaker that gets them into the position to use these words appropriately? There are two relatively old theories on that, so you have to go way back in the literature. The first one is Spitz's hypothesis from the 1950s, which is kind of linked to psychoanalysis, and he proposed that parental prohibition is at the root of the first use of children's negation words, so children's use of negation words. And then we have another hypothesis that says that was proposed, I mean it was not proposed as an hypothesis, but we kind of took it to be an hypothesis by Joanna Ryan and Roy D.P., who wrote his dissertation in, I think, the beginning 80s under Jerome Bruner about the development of negation. And there we find the notion of so-called intent interpretations, and in our case obviously particularly important are negative intent interpretations. So just to give you an idea what that is, so for example, if you look grumpy in the morning and your work colleague says, oh, you're really looking bad today, what's going on? Then this, you're really looking bad today, or you're really looking sad or grumpy today, that is an intent interpretation. That means I linguistically interpret your affective display, or it could also be a display of volition, not affect. But now both of these, notice that both of these types are linked to affect. Affect plays an important role in both. Yeah, just a side note, no has a lot of different functions, so I don't have time to go into that. There is a taxonomy. P developed a taxonomy of this, and we developed our own taxonomies that are based on P's taxonomy, so you would be surprised how many different functions a simple word like no can have, but there are a lot. In our study, we tried to recreate the two conditions that would likely lead participants to engage in these kinds of utterances. So prohibitions on one hand and negative intent interpretations on the other. We adapted an existing setup that we already had in place that we used for the acquisition of object labels and color words, which is an ICAP robot, humanoid robot, and we use naive participants. So participants that did, in our case, not know the true purpose of the study. So none of the participants knew that our study was focusing on negation. What we did additionally to the existing system was we added affective expressions. So because we knew affect plays a big role, we added affect to the robot. Externally and internally, the affective signal was propagated in the system, so it could be also grounded as if it was just another basically sensory motor signal. There's a whole bunch of technical details how we do word extractions. I don't really have time to go into that. Look into the paper. Importantly, I must say our word extraction is kind of motivated by child-directed speech, so we try to kind of emulate what we think our children, what the use children make of the modifications that mothers make when they talk to children. And our study, I think, is the only study that combines HRI with developmental robotics for the purpose of language acquisition. At least so far I haven't come across any other study using that. Normally people use trained personnel, or it's the developer themselves that talk to the robot and make it learn, but yeah, we use naive participants here. We have two experiments that are aligned to each other. We have a rejection experiment where basically participants are told to teach the robot the words for these objects, and the robot has certain preferences for these objects. It either likes or dislikes objects randomly, or it feels neutral about them, and it shows this by facial displays and body behaviors. And then we have the prohibition experiment, which builds on top of the rejection experiment, and so has everything that the rejection experiment has, but on top of that it also has the prohibition task. So there are now certain objects that are prohibited for participants to touch, for the robot to touch, and participants are told to push the robot's arm away if they would touch them, if it tries to touch them. So this is kind of a visual idea of it. Here in the upper left, the robot is relatively neutral about these objects. In the upper right, you see it's smiling, so it tries to go for it. It holds the hand out, and people can put the objects in its hand. In the upper left, lower left, you see it frowning, turning away. So this is a rejective move. So basically, it doesn't like the thing that she's here offering it. And on the lower right, we have basically the robot is trying to reach for something or holds the hand out, but it's not allowed to touch the object. And here his arm is being pushed back, which renders its affect negative instantaneously. We had 10 participants per experiment, 5 sessions per participant. So participants had to come into the lab 5 times. We have an independent learning trajectory per participant, so we don't throw data together. Learning takes place offline between sessions. As said, there's a whole lot of machinery how we extract words. We have a baseline data set that we use for later on for analytical comparisons from the previous experiments where the robot wouldn't express any affect. And yeah, this is a video to give you an impression how this looked like.
How about back to the circle? You really liked this one last time. You played with it a lot because it's like a ball. Yeah, do you like playing with this block here? The circular block? No, you don't like that one. Okay. We'll go back to the square one. 4 sides, 4 corners. Yes, you like that one this time, don't you? You didn't like it last time, but I can't play. You can't play with this one, unfortunately. I'm not allowed to give it to you. No, I'm sorry. No, you can't play. No, you're not allowed to.
Squares. You quite like squares, don't you? But they don't do it for me. They're very boring. But everything here is on a square. No, you can't have it. No, you can't have it. You can look at it, but you can't have it. It's no good. It's no good to in the face like that. You can't have it. You can look at it. But you can't have it, no.
There are a lot of negative utterances there, and these videos were not cherry-picked in terms of the negative utterances that were produced. I mean, they were cherry-picked because some of them are funny, but they were not kind of cherry-picked in terms of because we only see negative utterances there. What you see here in this graph is on the left-hand side we have an overview of all utterances. So there was no statistical significance between the 3 experiments in terms of the number of utterances that were used or produced by participants in total. However, if we focus on just negative utterances, you see that there is a significant difference between the 2 negation setups or experiments here and the baseline. So we kind of negative utterances all of a sudden shoot up that we didn't have before. If we look on the corpus level, what we find is that we know all of a sudden becomes a highly frequent word in the corpus. So if you throw all the data, all the speech from all participants together in one corpus and rank the words, what we find is here that no all of a sudden is the 6th most frequent word. And if, for example, in the rejection experiment, in the prohibition experiment, it's the 9th most frequent word, whereas in the baseline it's somewhere in rank 50. If we look at salient words only, and there are only prosodically salient words that kind of make up the robot's active vocabulary, this is even more pronounced. We see no here on rank 2. In the rejection experiment, on rank 4 in the prohibition experiment, and we see rank 32 in the baseline. Now, when you ask where do these negative utterances come from in terms of pragmatic types, we coded every utterance for their pragmatic type, for their function. We see that prohibitions are an excellent source of negation words. We also see that negative intent interpretations, and here a similar type I don't have time to talk to, are also very excellent types. And we also find what we would expect, truth functional denials. So the kind of stuff when the robot says, this is a square, and you say, no, it's a heart, that's a truth functional denial. We get that too, but funnily enough, the frequency of the kind of affect-related types here is a lot higher than even the truth functional negation types. I'm going to skip over this. So what this just shows is kind of gives you prosodic saliency rates of different types of words. What we found is that if we compare the 2 experiments statistically, we find that the rejection experiment does a lot better than the prohibition one. 2/3 of the utterances the robot gets right at the end, whereas in the prohibition experiment it only gets 1/3 of the utterances right, and it wasn't clear why. I don't have time to go into the analysis of this, but it has to do with our experimental setup. It's all explained in the paper. As in terms of conclusions, I can say both prohibitions and negative interpretations appear to be excellent sources for negation words, but we cannot draw a definite conclusion whether it's only one or the other that kind of forms the basis for the first use of negation words. Effective displays of a robot have a significant effect on participant speech, and there is a remarkable temporal alignment between the effective displays and the negative intent interpretations that are being produced. Thank you.